One of the most influential French queens throughout history was Catherine de Medici. She was known as the Serpent Queen, and she kept the French monarchy from collapsing. She is considered by historians one of the most important women in Europe during the 16th century, but centuries after her death in 1589, her corpse and her remains were subjected to a shocking and brutal ordeal as she was dug up and was disinterred from her tomb. She was actually buried twice following her death, but during the French Revolution, her tomb was smashed open and her corpse was taken out of the Basilica of Saint-Denis, and her body was dumped in a hastily dug pit along with the bodies of many other former kings and queens of France. But what happened with the desecration of Catherine de Medici? And to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Catherine de Medici was born in Florence on the 13th of April 1519. Her father was the Duke of Urbino and the ruler of Florence, and her mother was the cousin of Francis I, the King of France. Her mother died when she was only 2 weeks old, and her father died not long after, and because of this she was cared for by other family members. But in 1553, when she was just 14 years old, Catherine's uncle Pope Clement VII arranged her marriage to the Duke of Orleans, the second son of the French king. But the marriage to begin with was not incredibly happy, as her husband the Duke had a long affair with a lady named Diane de Poitiers. She was a rather important person throughout his life, and Catherine, his wife, remained somewhat of an afterthought at times. 10 years after they married, Catherine de Medici gave birth to her first child, and this made Catherine significantly more favourable. But in 1536, the Duke of Orleans became the heir to the throne, and he was then crowned Henry II of France years later. Henry did not reign for too long, as he died in a jousting accident in 1559, and Catherine then became a more important player in politics. Her eldest son Francis was proclaimed king, but he died shortly after too. In 1560, their second son Charles was crowned king at the age of 10, and Catherine de Medici was now acting as the regent ruling for France for her son until he became of age. She would dominate Charles during his reign and was seen as the real power behind the French throne. There was a lot of chaos inside of France that needed to be dealt with. For example, there was civil war inside of the nation. This conflict was known as the French Wars of Religion, but Catherine sought to try and bring some reconciliation, and she arranged the marriage of her daughter to the Protestant king Henry of Navarre. During the wedding celebrations in Paris, the leader of the Huguenots was murdered along with many other Protestants, and this even became known as St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre. Catherine was probably in some way behind the event. King Charles then died in 1574, and Catherine's favourite son succeeded as Henry III. She remained an important part of government until the end of her life. She was referred to as the Mother of State, but on the 5th of January 1589, Catherine died at the age of 69, most probably from pleurisy. It was said that those close to her believed her life had been shortened by displeasure over her son's deeds and actions. It was stated that Henry IV claimed about her that, "I ask you, what could a woman do, left by the death of her husband with 5 little children on her arms, and 2 families of France who were thinking of grasping the crown, our own, the Bourbons, and the Guises? Was she not compelled to play strange parts to deceive first one and then the other, in order to guard, as she did, her sons who successively reigned through the wise conduct of that shrewd woman? I am surprised that she never did worse." To begin with, Catherine de Medici had to be buried inside of Blois. Paris was held by enemies of the crown at the time. She was interred inside of Saint-Sauveur, but then on the 4th of April 1609, her remains were disinterred, and she was then buried at the Basilica of Saint-Denis, along with other royals in the mausoleum there. She remained undisturbed there for over a century. However, in 1793, following the outbreak of the French Revolution, anyone who had ties to the monarchy was subjected to a significant amount of desecration. The National Assembly wanted to send a message to people about worshipping the former royals, and with this they ordered a decree that ordered the desecration of the former royal tombs inside of the Basilia of St. Denis. Groups raided the church and they stole the coffins and broke into the sarcophagi. They also raided visceral urns, and the hearts and internal organs of the monarchs were desecrated. The revolutionaries made their way through the crypts of the chapel, and they removed the bodies and then took them outside to where a large trench had been dug. The bodies were thrown in the pit, and they were covered with quicklime to decay the corpses in a much quicker manner. The desecration was huge, and in 1817 the restored monarchy tried to find the royal remains, and only the lower parts of 3 corpses were ever discovered, and bone fragments belonging to 158 members of the royal family. One man who witnessed the exhumations of the bodies claimed that the putrefied bodies of some emitted a malodorous black vapour that sickened workers before it was checked with vinegar and burnt saltpetre. It was a nasty sight, and it was incredibly rough. 21 coffins had been broken into on the 16th of October 1793, and the remains were then thrown into a pit. One eyewitness claimed most of the bodies were decaying. A foul-smelling, thick black vapour was released, which they desperately tried to dispel with vinegar and powder that they had taken the precaution of burning, which did not prevent the workmen from feeling unwell and feverish without consequences. Things quickly turned violent inside of the crypt inside the Basilia of St. Denis, as many members of the crowd were angry with what the royals represented. A woman approached one of the corpses, and she swore at it and kicked it so hard that it was knocked off from the plinth where it had been laid down. One member of Catherine's house, Marie de Medici, the second wife of Henry IV, had her coffin broken into and opened. It was found that the remains were in some form of a liquid, and her body was then taken out, and things were thrown at her corpse, and it was insulted for the rest of the day. People in the crowd ripped pieces of her hair, and they turned upon other bodies. Catherine de Medici had been interred nearby, it's believed, and the crowd approached her tomb and coffin. She had been interred in a large rotunda that housed the remains of her and her husband. A large tomb has been constructed for her, but this was cracked open inside of the Basilia of St. Denis, and her coffin and remains were removed. They were taken roughly by the crowd out to the pit outside the church, and they were cast inside, where there was one part of her that may have remained. It's believed that one man who was collecting parts of the royals at the time had taken a section of St. Louis' skull, the teeth of King Henry III, and he had also taken the leg of Catherine de Medici. Now it's believed that, like the other bodies, that she had been embalmed, so it's not known how this man allegedly took possession of Catherine's leg. He may have hacked it off when her body was brought out from the chapel, or he just may have taken it straight from the coffin. In total, 46 kings, 32 queens, and members of the royal family, totaling 170 people, had their tombs smashed open, their coffins cracked open, and their bodies exhumed. All of them then had their bodies dumped unceremoniously inside of trenches outside the church, and one trench was for the Valois and the other for the Bourbons. A huge crowd gathered to witness the burial of the bodies, and the lime was poured into the graves to dissolve the remains quicker, but to also keep the smell down as the bodies stank. Later, the Basilia of St. Denis was reconsecrated, and as mentioned, the remains were attempted to be returned to the grave, but it was impossible to do this. The years in which her sons reigned have been referred to as the age of Catherine de Medici, because of the influence she had over them. She was a Queen Regent of France and a consort also, and she had for a long time held influence as the royal court. Catherine was known as a Serpent Queen for the fact she was a shrewd political manipulator. and a powerful force, but in the years following her death, her corpse was subjected to a shocking ordeal like many other French royals were during the French Revolution. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.